Morning. I'm Jeremy Oakey with the Cloud Platform and Solutions Group. So a lot of the products that are part of our multi-cloud software platforms, I run the product management for. So we're going to talk about, I'm kind of going to go through, there's obviously a lot of use cases here. We have a short amount of time. I'm going to talk about one specifically, migration use case, partially because I spoke at this on reInvent as well, so it's a good one if you want to dig a little deeper. I actually had a reInvent session you can go look up. And we can also, there's lots of other sessions, breakout sessions. We have a lab yesterday. There are product sessions and a whole bunch of other activities. So if you want to learn more about some of these products, they're all over in the event. So issues. What are we trying to accomplish with multi-cloud consume at Cisco? You know, obviously we have IT doesn't want to go through the ticket-based service request process. You can't be effective in a dynamic multi-cloud environment when you're still running change management and tickets very manually through silos. It's complicated. We had a hard enough time getting virtualization going in one environment. Now we're asking you to do it in 4, 5, 6, 7 environments. There's a lot of risk. The security guys want to see a consistent kind of policy framework. The network guys want to see a consistent kind of connectivity. You then have all these rules, policies, etc., and how are you going to comply with them? It was hard enough in one organization. Developers are the ones consuming this and want to do things faster. How do you get a very self-service and the ability for them to do things while not running through all the other problems? And the IT guys, how many people have moved out to Amazon and said, wow, that's really expensive when I start ramping up a lot of services on it? We can argue about cost. You know, there's a difference in OpEx and CapEx. But truly what was needed here is, how do I know what it's going to cost me? Who should approve something? If I'm using too big of instances, for example, how do I scale them back down? So cost isn't just I'm spending too much. It's also there's a right amount of cost for the right amount of business value, and you know, how do you get the intelligence to do that? So I'm going to go through these quick. Accelerate the life cycle, stay relevant, reduce cost, give the developers their feedback. Migration assurance, for example, when I move from one cloud to the other, do I know it's running right? And I need quality of service. When people are doing things manually, we all know human error is probably the biggest reason why things fail when we start doing things in operations. So I had polling at reInvent, pretty good sized room, and we asked the first question, how well do you understand your application? And got about what I expected. Most people, it's mostly tribal knowledge. You know, it's the guy down the corner happens to know quite a bit about application X. If he leaves, there's a pretty big loss of knowledge in the organization. The other one, it's not surprising, is there is documentation, but it's fairly static. Okay? So not very helpful when we're in a dynamic cloud environment if the application knowledge is either tribal or static. So in the use case of migration, for example, I want to start picking up existing workloads. This isn't necessarily going to make them cloud native or cloud ready, but sometimes we have customers, sometimes I'm out of power, I'm out of cooling. I accidentally moved an application out of Germany, and now GDRP, I need to get it back into Germany. How do I do that? So this isn't necessarily solving all the problems, but it's one example of, I need something that's going to go discover the applications. This could be zero knowledge, agentless. In this example, we're using a third-party company to do that. It could be AppDynamics. You already have it deployed. You already have all the application dynamic. Or it could be Tetration or third parties. Azure, for example, has a migration service they're about to launch as well to do discovery. I need to know how it works today in my environment. I need a baseline. Because when I move it, my business wants to know it's going to be the same or better when I move to the next place. Who's actually going to move it? The process of flying bits, transforming them, you know, changing SCSI drivers, network drivers, and such from one virtualization platform to another is a process. I need to then do that baseline again. Is it actually running better? And then I also need to compare it, and finally, I need to manage it ongoing. So, example of some products we're using. Some of these are third-party, some Cisco. So, Equate is a partner we use for discovery. There's a lot of vendors that do this, but they'll do the discovery of a zero knowledge, and some need an agent. Who's going to actually do the performance baseline? AppDynamics. This is one of the functions it does. It's part of the multi-cloud consume. Cloud Door is just one of many vendors who do a great job of actually taking the bits, flying them across the wire, transforming them to another image type. And then AppDynamics, again, running the baseline, comparing the performance. And then how do I now manage it? I need to now introduce the management orchestration of it as well. So CloudCenter is also the product that is actually orchestrating all this movement around the circle. Okay? So this is an example of in-product AppDynamics screenshots, but I need to know technically that it's better. Did my actual response time get better technically in milliseconds? Am I seeing, you know, it historically in graphing it? Am I seeing calls per minute and other things? And there's a lot of technical metrics, but this is a technical view of it's better. AppDynamics has the ability to break it down into business as well. Okay? So things like business relevance. how many user conversions, how much revenue did I get? This is stuff you actually have to configure. So the user conversion rate, this is the business metrics. What was my user experience like? My Android phone, my iOS phone, they should see a better user experience. So not only technical metrics, but actually business metrics. Okay? So this is an example of just one of many use cases we're trying to make sure we accomplish in the multi-cloud consume portfolio. So let's talk a little bit about the two products that make it up from the Cisco perspective. So AppDynamics Aqua, acquired right before the IPO, good, great technology. The future of intelligence. What are we doing with them? We want to look at the user experience. We want to actually get into the applications. We want to give feedback to the developers on the code they're actually seeing. When a problem happens, which line of code is it? Which database query actually caused the problem? That deep drill down that's developer relevant. And finally, root cause analysis. Knowing my application to migrate it is one thing, but actually having a dynamic map of what's running where and when it's broken, what's the root cause analysis. We have lots of customers, or your personal experience, you have a problem with an app that's mission critical, you fill a war room up for 14 hours and everyone points at each other and the app guys blame the network guys blame the database. The problem is still that the business has an impact. So this is what is going on. So getting that kind of visibility all the way across the spectrum from the user to the infrastructure. This is also starting to turn into our network intuitive announcements. Things like getting the policy updates to actually flow into the network, getting that updated real time, seeing the result of changes real time is what's the capability of AppDynamics. So just a little example of how we kind of break that down into the business transaction, the end user, wrapping it all in security. This is important. Okay. So, top reasons for multi-cloud. This kind of leads into CloudCenter. People are already using multiple clouds. We're seeing they want to avoid lock-in. Sometimes people, you're very happy with Amazon, but maybe an outage or two, and you want to maybe spread your risk around. Buyer leverage. I've had a great relationship, but prices are going down. How do I keep at least everyone sharpening the pencil to give me the best price? Geography requirements. Your favorite vendor is just not in a place you want to be. So we asked the same question, polling at reInvent. How many clouds are in use in your organization? We've seen this kind of trending to 3 to 4 now. It seems to be where we're kind of landing everybody. It was a little interesting, it was 2 to 3. Most people have VMware on-premise and they're trying to get something else up and running. OpenStack, Azure Stack, something to maybe lower their cost or what have you. We're also seeing most people move to 2 public clouds at least. Our biggest customer that comes to mind has 6 clouds in 25 regions that I can think of. So we are finding a lot of, but 3 to 4 seems to be kind of the sweet spot for people today. So, anyone familiar with CloudCenter here? I was afraid that might be the case, so I didn't want to bore you with the slides, but at least want to tell you what it is. So CloudCenter was an acquisition as well, Clicker. It's a cloud management platform, and it's a little bit unique in that it has a distributed architecture. It has a model once, deploy and manage anywhere approach. So how you actually instantiate a virtual machine, a virtual network, virtual storage, it's hiding the complexity of the actual API call. So you model an outcome. I want to deploy my application stack without having to get into the specifics of the image that I need. How do I actually get Tomcat stood up on the EC2 versus another technology type? And then it's also distributed orchestrators. The orchestrators run within the cloud regions. Let's call them personalities. These orchestrator personalities are where the actual abstraction occurs. When you deploy to Amazon, you deploy an orchestrator with an Amazon personality.
So it's similar to Terraform or Cloudify or CloudFormation, which is only Amazon.
In some ways, CloudForms and Terraform tend to get very specific, very prescriptive and declarative. I want to call this image to do this thing in this region using this VPC, and we're taking it up a level and saying,
Don't say intent.
No, it's not intent. It's more abstracted just in that I have an outcome I want. In the back end, you still have to have image mappings. You still have to have environment mappings. But we call those things like deployment environments. An administrator comes in through policy and says, production should attach to this VPC. So in the back end, it's a deployment environment. So we're correlating a deployment tag or governance tag to some of the hardwired infrastructure. That's no longer hardwired in the application or the service catalog item though. So if you have 1 or 1,000, they're all just using deployment tags. I want prod or I want dev. The developer does not know that dev attaches to the network. It also eliminates clouds. Dev policy may only be allowed to be public. It may be your applications that your production you want private. So based on the tags as well, deployment environments are included or excluded. Okay? So it's similar in its intent, but it's unique in that the abstraction is trying to make it where you don't have to worry about the nuances. What happens here is what happens when a new cloud comes up.
So it's another layer of abstraction on top of that layer of abstraction.
Yeah, but we don't actually use the cloud.
No, I know you don't.
You're right. You don't want to stack too many layers of abstraction on top of each other. But we're actually carrying the abstraction to the outcome rather than the infrastructure programming. So the outcome is, how do you get a Tomcat container or virtual machine stood up rather than some of the really detailed nuances. And what this allows you to do is, your CIO comes to you tomorrow and says, hey, Amazon's great, but I feel better if we distribute our risk, or they're doing something great in this other kind of technology, I'd like to use both. You spent a whole lot of time learning Amazon and learning all the APIs and learning their console. Now you have to take all that knowledge and go redo it on another cloud. So that's really the abstraction here, is try to get where you get a lot more portability between clouds. Now, are we going to move Amazon RDS to another cloud? No, some things are cloud.
No, this sounds great till you have to troubleshoot what went wrong.
True. Well, one, AppDynamics is important. Two, we have a lot of things that we already do that for you. So how we actually step through the orchestration, it's pretty verbose. In the logging, it'll actually show you how things are instantiated. It's making API calls out to the product. So it's...
No, the point is, well, that's great to hear, but the point is that if you don't understand the APIs because your CIO just told you to move, you're flying cloud.
No, you're right. And in some cases, it does break down to an API. In other cases, it's actually more just specifically your application. Most of our users, they actually troubleshoot because they went to do a deployment and something didn't happen right in the virtual machine. It wasn't that a VM instance didn't spin up. It was that something for the outcome failed. So for example, when we go to deploy something, we also roll it back if it fails. Well, you can go in and say, like, there's a troubleshooting flag. They'll actually leave it, because sometimes you want to leave the state however it failed, figure it out, and then iterate it, and then let people redeploy again. And so most of the time, setting that flag where it remains running, then you just kind of manually, finally you destroy it, and then we'll clean it up. But at least we pause it, so you can go in and see and guess what are the logs, and usually it's not actually the cloud API. Truth is, these guys are very mature, their APIs work. It's rarely actually their plumbing, it's usually your business process. Exactly. One of the points here, the orchestrators run in the cloud regions. They are multi-tenant and multi-account aware. So if, like service provider, I have 50 customers all using Amazon US West. I don't deploy the orchestrator 50 times for each customer. It's one highly available cluster of orchestrators that then understand tenant A versus tenant B. Even within tenant A, you have an account that you pay for, you have an account that you pay for. Your deployments are tied to your account. So the orchestrators are actually multi-tenant and multi-cloud account aware.
But when you talk about multi-tenant, it's still one organization. It's not that you are sharing this across multiple of your customers.
Not necessarily. Now, when Clicker was acquired, we did actually have a SaaS offering. That does not exist for Cisco. We do intend to bring it back at some point in the near future. So it could actually be multi-tenant. We have service providers that actually use this, and we're the engine behind the scenes. So their offering is actually multi-customer, multi-tenant. So in some cases, some orchestrators may be public, and everyone shares them. One orchestrator may only go to tenant A on it's a VMware personality and only attaches to tenant A. So even orchestrators can actually attach and only service certain tenants. So it is truly multi-tenant. So what kind of happens? We're not using the cloud's orchestration. Okay, the request comes from a self-service portal. It's then sent to the orchestrator. He then figures out how to kind of swizzle to get it in the language of the local cloud. It provisions the things. The VMs launch, it waits for them. We inject an agent. We also don't have to have an agent, but you lose some flexibility. When you want to configure things in the guest, you usually need an execution context for it. So you need some credentials. But sometimes we get hardened appliances, or we can hit them externally via API calls, or some sort of script language, or some other config management. So it doesn't have to be an agent, but most people do use the agent. Then we pull. The images can be baked, or we can actually be streaming packages in as well. So part of actually managing your developers, pushing new code, the artifact repository can be global across all the clouds, and then we're actually streaming in the latest binaries and builds and bringing up the stack. So it gets pretty predictable. We know it takes about X number of minutes to bring it up. Once you kind of get the troubleshooting down, 1,000 deployments all take the same amount of time until something changes in the actual outcome. Okay? Apply the security. So then, for example, the security happens in certain ways. On a VMware environment with ACI, we're actually programming the SDN fabric through ACI. So the database shouldn't be able to talk to the presentation layer. That's programmed in. On Amazon, we're actually programming security groups and ACLs so that the database can't. Some clouds don't have this capability. The abstraction is not lowest common denominator. It's going to imbue the outcome with as much capability as the cloud offers.
I have to ask, do you work with NSX?
We did.
Okay.
We took it out because we changed some architecture things to actually improve, and we're going to bring it back in later this year. In our 5.x release, we are bringing NSX back. Now, your question is, did we take it out because we're Cisco? No, we're not. I mean, the truth is, Cisco is a software company. We have a multi-cloud kind of cloud-neutral approach, so we do need to support things that compete with Cisco. Should we make things kind of first and best with Cisco or advantage? Absolutely. But NSX is coming back. We have seen it actually grow in popularity. We are seeing customers have production deployments where they're using NSX. We have seen some where NSX is on top of ACI. We have seen people who have pivoted just to NSX. I don't work for the ACI team. We'd love to sell some ACI to a customer, but NSX is coming back. You know, if something else takes over, Open Contrails becomes popular. Architecturally, it's not that big of a deal for us to put into the abstraction another SDN. So we're not against it. There's no Cisco policy that says CloudCenter will not support them. It's, you know, it comes down to how many people are using it, market timing, engineering commits on the roadmap, etc. Okay.
You mentioned the security rules. What about the virtual networking? Do you also create and provision the networks, the load balancers, the edge gateways?
We can. So let's not, you kind of have to get into, we probably won't have time to get into it, but one-time setup activities and recurring activities are separate. We do have a lot of service providers that actually do have, where ordering and reusability of one-time setup activities is done with CloudCenter out of a catalog. In an enterprise, a lot of times they don't find value in it. The network guys go in and decide, how do I plumb the dev, the prod, the stage, and they do it one time. You absolutely can do it in cloud, and sometimes we call another product to do it. Like we'll call DNA Center, or we'll call TailF, the NSO to do it. So you have different domain orchestrators. CloudCenter will be the chainer of those things. It just depends on the use case. But some people, it's a one-time setup. Sometimes people actually use Terraform for that, because at least they get a template. It's very prescriptive. They can reuse it in a DR event. So we actually do see sometimes where we'll actually call Terraform as a one-time catalog event, and then we'll use application profiles to do the repetitive stuff over and over and over.
So the idea is that you provision infrastructure in advance, and then as you deploy applications, you deploy VMs on existing virtual infrastructure.
Right. Okay. And some of the reasons for that is you have a governance model. I mean, you have to build that deployment environment and put the governance rules on top of it. You kind of have to create pools of resources and declare, this is for prod, this is for dev, this is for one compliance domain, this is for another compliance domain. In an enterprise, that's usually a very architectural discussion. It's very purposeful, I guess is the right word. And you have a lot of experts that put a whole lot of time in coming up with purposeful, and that's not really something that's worth turning into a repeatable process.
Yeah, well, the reason I'm asking is because, as you know, you have these two approaches. One is everything is centralized and pre-built and everything. And the other one is, well, this belongs to the application, and the application stack should have all this built in, and it should be, you know, black box from the outside. Yeah. And it's interesting to hear you saying that no one is going for this approach.
Yeah, it depends on, I think our next session is going to talk about something else that's moving to more containers. I think we're seeing obviously a lot more adoption when you move to out of the virtualization realm, which is a little more difficult to put together and run well, to something that's containers where the application does actually do more just-in-time kind of configuration. Yeah, I would agree with you. So real quick, extensible. So we have lots of kind of east-west, north-south kind of integrations for this. So we don't necessarily do config management. So a lot of times the actual streaming in the packages and ongoing day two management might be Puppet or Chef or Ansible. Perfectly fine with that. We have a lot of customers that actually do use the product to actually instantiate using Ansible, and we just happen to be the engine that's executing it. So what does that kind of look like maybe for a customer? You know, they might use Jira, they have Lifecycle Manager, they have config management, they might have their logging, reporting, and monitoring. We're configuring those outcomes as part of the application profiles. And then down here, maybe all the clouds they're using. So just some examples. This one might be dev, that one might be prod, this one might be PCI, this one might be non-PCI. So adding the non-technical guardrails around the technical ecosystem. We also see a lot of times where ITSM is used here. So ServiceNow, Sherwell, we have a Prime Service Catalog, where we're actually publishing up the profiles so that things like more complex workflow approvals or financial management, you know, we will also take and inject back the configuration items in the CMDB. So a lot of times that's the biggest problem people have in cloud. They can automate the deployment, but then how do they actually get the real-time CI updates into their CMDB? So we already have integrations with a lot of the main vendors that do that. So real quick, the pipeline is dynamic here. That's the one thing that's a little hard, and it's too hard to explain it here in detail, but based on the different profile, the different tiers, what needs to happen, what integrations, the actual orchestrator execution is dynamically rendered. And so you kind of flow from the services to the tiers back down to the service. I have a web server. It's the load balancer tier. I then come back down, I have a middleware. It then does something. I need to wire it to the database. So there's actually kind of a flow that occurs that people learn how to use the product. A lot of times, this is all the different lifecycle actions we call. You may only use one. I may only do like a pre-stop action. I may do like at the end post-terminate cleanup. You may only use a couple of them, but we have all these different lifecycle actions where you kind of choose what needs to happen to get your outcome. So, that's a lot of info for you guys, but hopefully, I think what we're trying to do in the consume is really kind of cement Cisco as kind of, we are a cloud neutral provider. We got out of the public cloud business. We're trying to offer the tooling to actually consume a multi-cloud world, and also get into how do we bring in the ecosystem. So the connect, the protect, some of what you already heard, getting those where they all actually are part of these orchestrations and deployments is really what we're trying to accomplish in that portfolio. Have you guys heard from Advisory yet? So there's also a consulting group, and we have a partner ecosystem. So this is where, how do customers actually make this journey? I think the biggest challenge here is it's kind of incremental. You know, some people are just looking at migrate because they just need to get out of a data center. Some people are trying to modernize their application portfolios and making the jump from like VM to container. So we have a lot of different ways to do that. So hopefully you got a flavor of it today. So 5 minutes for questions.
Does it require a greenfield deployment or can we integrate with an existing infrastructure?
It is not greenfield required. We do ship some bundles and things that help customers buy greenfield, but most of these implementations, someone's already kind of done VM automation or other infrastructure automation, and it was that jump to multi-cloud or that jump to application centricity that really said, okay, we have a problem now. You know, Terraform was great for IaaS services, but how do I actually give full out, like instant development environments is our most common use case. I got developers, I'm trying to teach new technologies to be cloud ready, cloud native. How do I give them an environment to actually start experimenting more and kind of taking the brakes off? So that's an example. That usually drops right onto an existing kind of brownfield VMware environment, or they already have Amazon accounts and the core company wants to put a little governance around it so that at least they're not picking the biggest instance sizes. There's some instance sizes now that run $26 an hour. So you can actually, in the deployment environment, restrict which network, how many instance sizes they can use. So yeah, it usually starts brownfield, and then they incrementally add clouds. And that's how most people actually start. A couple simple applications, maybe 1 or 2 clouds, and then their actual capability expands upon there. Okay.
I have just a quick question. If customers start to using your services, how long will it usually take until this is up and running and integrated?
So CloudCenter and AppDynamics installation, usually partners install it in about 2 weeks and have it up and running. It's the content, so these are platforms, so you're actually creating content. And usually there's sort of a DevOps evolution that's occurring at the same time. We're not going to magically turn an organization into a DevOps ready. So usually getting your kind of common images that run on all clouds. Image management still, I think 2 years ago at reInvent, we actually showed using Packer from our catalog to generate the images and then using our APIs to remap them. You still have to do like your monthly image management and things, so that has to be figured out. Where you actually pull the source of truth for accepted corporate binaries is something that has to occur as well. So we have a lot of experience with this and can tell people the quick path to it. You then have to get into which applications are right for the cloud. Some just aren't ready for the cloud. So we usually find people kind of start with 5 services, 5 becomes 20, 20 becomes 100. Most of our customers within about a year have hundreds of applications and services in the platform. They usually start sort of crawl, walk, run. And it usually starts pretty quickly with IaaS services, maybe simple applications, instant development environments for new development, and eventually some of our customers run, we have one that has like 80 virtual machines in 7 layers. They deploy it in 3 hours. It used to take them weeks just to deploy each stack. And so they actually only use the platform for 1 application, but that was so critical to their business, they got it down to where it's just consistently 3 hours now, and they use it on 3 clouds, 1 private, 2 public. So some people it's 1 app, 1 cloud, some people it's 1 app, multiple clouds, but most of our customers, it's a progression over about a year to where they really have a whole portfolio of things that meet a lot of the needs. Okay.
When I see a product that orchestrates many other different platforms, my first concern is, do you have any agreement with a third party to keep like the API, the support of your orchestrator for at least like 1 year? So if they update, you can update and have everything running?
Good question. Yeah, we work pretty closely with them all. Agreements are in an API world are a little tricky, but in Cisco, we have a support strategy that says we always support things for 18 months from release, which is a long time in the cloud world.
Okay, to
So we
support
keep
your
pretty close to
product, but do you have any control on third party? Like if Amazon or any cloud provider changes API tomorrow, do you have any agreement to have the new API before it goes public so you can support?
We don't. And I'll tell you, in the more mature cloud providers, this isn't a problem. Like Amazon went from short IDs to long IDs. They gave everyone like a year notice. Azure made some changes, gave everyone 9 months notice. We get plenty of notice, and we're already kind of tied in strategically with all those providers. Now, there are less mature cloud providers. Sometimes we find out something changed, and we usually fix it in a couple weeks. Because we have abstraction, a lot of times if an API changes, like they went from V1 to V2, it's usually not a big deal. Your outcome might be broken for a moment in time, but we usually, once we fix it, your whole outcome actually is fixed permanently. So we do have to, in the less mature cloud providers, kind of keep up and periodically test them. Sometimes, candidly, we hear about a problem from the customer first. That's not the case with the big providers. They're far more mature.
So the case like happened with NSX that it dragged out, you don't expect that this will happen with one of the, let's say, major cloud providers, yeah?
Yeah, no, like there are some changes, like HP changed from being a public to a private and then spun out, so we did support HP, and then they shut down within like 60 days, so we moved them to private and moved them off completely. There's been a few of those, the consolidations, so we kind of keep up with that. That is a risk in this, but at least having the portability and like the outcome is at least portable, you can at least pick up and move it to another cloud provider as well. But yeah, we can't mitigate every single risk that's out there. I mean, there are some that are just, we're all going to kind of in it together. If all of a sudden Amazon said we're out of this business and shut down, yeah.
That would be interesting.
It would. It is a highly unlikely scenario, but it illustrates my point of what would you do if you had 90 days to get everything you run your business off of Amazon.
We're going back to books.
Yeah.